October 10th, 1984. Space Shuttle Challenger, mission STS-41G. The shuttle is gliding silently over the steppes of Kazakhstan. It is the height of the Cold War, but up here, everything is peaceful. Commander Robert Crippen is at the controls. The crew is conducting routine checks. Suddenly, the tranquility breaks. Systems begin to malfunction. Communications with Houston crackle with static. Onboard computers register a momentary, inexplicable anomaly. The crew feels watched. They are flying over Sari Shagan, the Soviet Union's most secretive military testing range. A place that does not exist on any civilian map. And down below on the dusty floor of the testing range, a massive turret is tracking them. It isn't firing a missile. It isn't firing a bullet. It is firing light. When the Challenger returned to Earth, rumors began to circulate in the Pentagon. Dark whispers. Intelligence reports claiming that the Soviets hadn't just tracked the shuttle. They had attacked it. They claimed a high-powered laser had illuminated the spacecraft, causing the malfunctions and temporarily blinding the crew. The US government officially denied it, but privately they were terrified. Because they knew something the public didn't. They knew that for 20 years, the Soviet Union had been pouring billions of rubles into a weapon straight out of science fiction. A weapon designed to melt spy satellites, blind American pilots, and turn the vacuum of space into a killing field. They called it Terra 3. And while the Americans were playing catch with film buckets, the Soviets were building a death ray. To understand why the Soviets built a laser, you have to understand the humiliation they were feeling in the 1960s. We previously discussed Project Corona, the American spy satellite that stripped away the Soviet Union's secrets. For the first time in history, the Kremlin had no roof. The Americans could see every tank, every silo, every bomber. The Soviet leadership was furious. Nikita Khrushchev demanded a way to close the curtains. But how do you stop a satellite? You can launch a missile at it. The Soviets had anti-satellite missiles, but missiles are messy. They create debris fields that can destroy your own satellites, and launching a missile is an act of war. It leaves a smoke trail. It's loud. Everyone knows you did it. They needed something cleaner, something invisible, something that traveled at the speed of light. They didn't need to blow the satellite up. They just needed to blind it. If you shine a flashlight into a person's eyes, they can't see you. If you shine a gigawatt laser into a spy satellite's camera lens, you don't just dazzle it. You fry the optics. You burn out the retina of the machine. The satellite continues to orbit, but it sends back nothing but static. A soft kill. In 1964, the Nobel Prize for Physics went to two Soviet scientists, Nikolai Basov and Alexander Prokhorov, for the invention of the laser. The Americans invented the laser too, but the Soviets were obsessed with weaponizing it immediately. They established the Wimpel Design Bureau. Their mandate was simple: build a gun that shoots light. And they chose the most desolate place on Earth to do it. Sari Shagan, the grave of the steppe. This was the Soviet Area 51, a massive exclusion zone on the banks of Lake Balkhash. It was here that they built the radars that watch the sky, and it was here, in the late 1960s, that construction began on Object 2505, codename Terra 3. Terra 3 wasn't a handheld phaser. It was a building, a massive, industrial complex the size of a cathedral. To generate a laser beam powerful enough to burn through the atmosphere and hit a target 200 miles up, you need energy. An insane amount of energy. The facility required its own power plant. It had banks of capacitors the size of school buses. Inside the complex, they weren't just building one laser. They were experimenting with two distinct types of monsters. First, a massive ruby laser. This used a synthetic crystal rod to focus light. It was precise, capable of delivering short, sharp pulses of energy. Great for tracking, great for range finding. But the real killer was the gas dynamic laser. A gas dynamic laser is essentially a rocket engine trapped in a box. You burn jet fuel to create a supersonic flow of hot gas, usually carbon dioxide. You pass that gas through a series of mirrors. The energy from the gas molecules is extracted as a coherent beam of invisible infrared light. It sounds brilliant. In practice, it was a nightmare. The vibration was so intense it cracked the concrete foundations. The optics, the mirrors that directed the beam, had to be cooled with liquid nitrogen or they would melt instantly. And then there was the atmosphere. The air we breathe is the enemy of lasers. Dust, water vapor, and turbulence scatter the beam. This is called atmospheric blooming. As the laser heats the air expands and acts like a lens, diffusing the beam. The tighter you try to focus the beam, the more the air fights back. To fight this, Soviet scientists developed primitive adaptive optics, flexible mirrors that could warp in real time to counteract the distortion of the atmosphere. It was engineering on the edge of the impossible. But by 1973, the beast was awake, and the Americans were starting to notice. US intelligence analysts looking at photos of Shagan were baffled. They saw the massive radars, they saw the missile silos, but then they saw this thing. A building with a massive optical director on the roof. No missile rails, no gun barrels, just a window pointing at the stars. The CIA designated it the Directed Energy Facility. And then the satellites started going blind. In late 1975, American early warning satellites over the Soviet Union began reporting events. These satellites, designed to detect the infrared heat of a nuclear missile launch, were suddenly being flooded with energy. Their sensors were saturated. Was it a malfunction? A solar flare? Or was it a test? General George Keegan, the head of Air Force intelligence, was convinced. He claimed the Soviets were hundreds of times more powerful than the US believed. He claimed Terra 3 was already operational and was lasing US satellites to test its range. The skeptics in Washington laughed at him. They said lasers were science fiction. They said the energy requirements were impossible. But the glitches kept happening. Which brings us back to the Space Shuttle Challenger in 1984. The incident is still shrouded in controversy. But here is what we know. The shuttle passed directly over Shagan. The crew reported malfunctions. The US filed a diplomatic protest. Secretary of Defense Caspar Weinberger later stated that the crew was temporarily blinded by a Soviet laser. So did the Soviets try to shoot down the shuttle? Probably not. The reality was likely more mundane, but equally terrifying. The Soviets were likely using a low-power tracking laser, a LiDAR system, to paint the shuttle so their radars could lock onto it. They weren't trying to kill the crew, they were just measuring the range. But to the crew on board, and to the paranoid generals in the Pentagon, it looked like the prelude to Star Wars. And that paranoia was exactly what the Soviets wanted, until it backfired. In 1983, President Ronald Reagan announced the Strategic Defense Initiative. The press mocked it as Star Wars. Reagan proposed a massive shield of space-based lasers that could shoot down Soviet nuclear missiles. Critics said it was scientifically impossible. They said it would cost trillions. But Reagan had a secret card up his sleeve, Terra 3. The US intelligence community used the existence of Terra 3 to justify SDI. They argued, the Soviets are already doing it, we have to catch up. The irony is tragic. Terra 3 was a failure. We now know from declassified Soviet archives that the laser never reached its design power. The beam quality was terrible. It couldn't shoot down a missile. It could barely irritate a satellite. It was a money pit, a billion-ruble science experiment that didn't work. But the Americans didn't know it was a failure. They thought it was a threat, so they launched SDI. And when the Soviets saw the US committing to SDI, they panicked. They thought, the Americans must know something we don't. If they are building space lasers, we must build more space lasers. The Soviets launched the Polya spacecraft, a prototype orbital laser platform. They poured money they didn't have into countermeasures. Terra 3, a broken laser in the desert, accidentally triggered an arms race that bankrupted the Soviet Union. Today, the Terra 3 complex sits rotting in the Kazakhstan desert. Scrappers have stripped the copper wiring. The massive ruby crystals are gone, sold or stolen. The death ray is now a home for pigeons. It stands as a monument to the paranoia of the Cold War. A weapon built to fight a war that never happened, using technology that never quite worked. But the dream didn't die in the desert. Today, high-energy lasers are back. The US Navy puts them on destroyers to burn drones. The Russian military parades the Peresvet laser truck, which they claim can, you guessed it, blind satellites. The physics haven't changed. It's still hard. The atmosphere is still the enemy. But the desire to control the light remains. We often think of space as a sanctuary, a place for science and exploration. But for the men who built Terra 3, space was just another battlefield. It was the ultimate high ground. They tried to turn the light of the stars into a weapon. They failed. But next time you look up at the night sky and see a satellite passing over, remember, somewhere down here a machine might be watching it back. And next time, it might not blink. This is Shadow Works. Keep your eyes on the horizon.